right, well, good afternoon and welcome to Clearing Up the TRID Rumors Part 2. I'm Callie Waterhouse with the Arizona Association of Realtors, and today we present Part 2 of this three-part series. We'll be answering your TRID questions about closing, financing, and timelines. And before we get started today, we're just going to do a brief update on MLS Connect with AAR Vice President of Business Services and Tech Guru, Nick Cantonese. And Nick is just back from San Diego and a little under the weather. So if you hear any coughing, it's him. But welcome, Nick.
Thank you.
So tell us all about MLS Connect.
Well, MLS Connect is up and running very well. And as expected, they've done a very nice job. We have a little bit of improvement we'd like to make on it. But these aren't critical pieces, but they're pieces that people have been asking about. On your contract, you'll probably have noticed that there's a field for the MLS code. And while not required, it's desired. And so we've asked them to add those pieces of information to the data fields that have moved from MLS Connect into your forms. So I don't have a time frame for that. I've been told it's not a difficult addition, so I would expect that you'll see that over the course of the next few weeks. We will be working with the MLSs throughout the state, although they all use a similar system for their software, which is the Flex system. They all map differently. So we're going to work with each of the MLSs individually to make sure that we maximize the number of data fields that come over into your transaction. So if you're seeing some shortcomings, fret not. We will be working with them and try to get as much as possible into your transactions. If you haven't used MLS Connect, or you have anybody asking you about MLS Connect and they don't know how to use it or are unfamiliar, would like to talk to somebody, please have them call the Business Services and Technology Support line, which is 866-833-7357, or they can email to support@aaronline.com. On the aaronline.com website, we have some wonderful pages that describe exactly what to do and how to do it. But if you want to talk to somebody, feel free to give us a call.
Excellent.
That's my update.
Wonderful.
Oh, wait, Nick, I have a couple of questions I'd like to ask. Thank you very much. Hey, so I should use MLS Connect on the new contract for what reasons? What's it giving me now that you've been working so hard to get over the last couple of months?
I'm glad you asked, Jim. The best reasons really are your license numbers. You know, for the new TRID requirements, which took effect October 3rd, we want to make sure that you've got the correct information in your contracts before you submit them. And MLS Connect will bring not only your own license number onto those forms, but that of your brokers and of the selling agent as well, because that information is brought in from the listing in your MLS. So really, that's the best reason. If you find that information is not correct, please go to the aaronline.com website. There's instructions for you to follow that will allow you to get that information correctly into the system. So TRID is the big reason, but the other big reason is accuracy and to save time, because that's what ZipForm does best. When you populate one field, it populates into all of your forms.
Perfect. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I knew you'd ask.
Any other questions?
That's all for me, unless there's any from our audience.
There you go. Frank has a comment that says if we could get a standardized legal description to come across, that would be great.
We're actually, Frank, good question, because that works in some of the MLSs in the state, but you would think it would work in all, and actually Armless does not have that functioning right now. We have had that conversation with Armless, and we're hoping to get them to release that data onto the MLS stream shortly. So keep watching for that. We're hoping that they allow us to bring that over as well.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. So now on to the good stuff. So today's presenter, thank you so much, Nick. So today's presenter is current AAR President Jim Sexton, and Jim brings over or almost 35 years of real estate and leadership experience to us, having served local, state, and national leadership, way too many committees to mention, as well as the designated broker of the Realty One Group. Jim sets the bar for both ethics and integrity in our industry. Jim is a GRI designee, a CRB, and a certified ethics instructor. He is also a 3-time, make that 4-time Realtor of the Year recipient, and we are thrilled to have him as our president and our presenter today. Jim will be speaking for about 60 minutes. We've collected a ton of questions from our members, and we'll be answering those. If you haven't sent in your questions or you have questions during today's presentation, please use the question box feature. Type in your question. I'll be moderating them and reading them as we go along. So please use that. We are here to answer your questions. And if you have any more questions, use the question box. And as always, today's webinar will be recorded and available on aaronline.com within a week. So Jim, we're kicking it off today. We're going to start by talking about closing statements and financing and timelines. And then at the very end, Jim's going to give us an update from the NAR convention in San Diego last week. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you, Callie. Great to be here. You know, when you say 4-time Realtor of the Year, it's 2 local for Phoenix, now 2 for the state. So it's not 4 states, but thank you very much. It is definitely an honor to be recognized, and that's one of my favorite pictures that you put up there.
Well, that is a great picture. I'll put it back up so people can see it again. I love this picture.
Wait a minute, which one am I? Oh, there I am.
That is true enthusiasm.
You bet. Well, you know, and had that blown up on social media. Once it started getting posted, that was from Saturday. So by Saturday evening, Sunday, there was a lot of likes on there and a lot of comments. And I thank everybody for their congratulatory wishes and comments. Thank you very much.
Well deserved. All right, so we're going to kick it off with closing statements. And a couple of the people came back and they just wanted to know, what was the definition of closing?
Recently, I had another video that I did with our commissioner and Paula Servin, and we were talking about what do I need in the file now that the HUD 1 is going away. And so that whole process, you know, again, we recorded it. And then Judy also had that on her cover of the bulletin, the cover story of the bulletin that came out last week. So if you want to look at, you've got a couple choices, either go to the bulletin or go to the previous video. And so she spells out the whole closing statement and what is a closing and all of that. From an agent's perspective, obviously we're talking about the close of escrow, we're talking about the closing package that we get from title, and the fact that the HUD 1 is going away. You know, the question becomes, what are we going to need? Title has evolved to a document called a settlement statement. Settlement statements have been used for years in cash deals, and so now they're also going to be the documents that are used for finance deals. And so, you know, as we look at what is a closing, we're not only getting the loan documents signed, but we're getting we're taking it so that we're able to have recording the deed recorded and transfer title. So closing, the definition of the closing is the same as it's been. We're just kind of, you know, chopping it up and making sure that we know all the different steps that need to happen before we actually get to the closing.
Great. Okay, so true or false? And folks listening in, if you will chime in your answer, the agent needs and will always receive a copy of the closing disclosure. So true or false? The agent needs and will always receive a copy of the closing disclosure. True or false? Very good. Looks like we have some experience speaking here. Wonderful. And Jen, the answer is?
It's going to be false, isn't it?
False, absolutely. So we had 100% saying false.
All right.
So very good.
Well, we're going to have to ask them to do this next time then, right? So let's talk about that question before we go on. And the question is going to be, what has happened to the closing disclosure and who gets it. Obviously, the initial closing disclosure that we've been talking about is a document that goes from lender to buyer, lender to buyer. Well, wait, where's the broker in that line? And the answer is the broker isn't in that line. The broker could receive a copy of the closing disclosure from that the lender prepares, but they're only going to get it from their client, the buyer. And so, but another thing has happened, since our last discussion, and that is the title industry has come up with a seller closing disclosure document, which is I found kind of strange because it's not something that was regulated or that was required to be done from the CFPB. However, title needed to get their charges and title needed to get the seller into the mix with their numbers. Obviously, the lender is most concerned about the title charges that are coming to the buyer, although they put seller charges on their closing disclosure, those aren't necessarily going to be the real numbers or the final numbers. So it was kind of interesting that now there's a document that looks very similar to the lender closing disclosure, and it's now referred to as the seller closing disclosure. And I'll talk about that later in our program. So who receives the settlement statement? Now, so we got closing disclosure is going to be lender to buyer, but we want what replaces the HUD-1. Again, we're going back to the settlement statement, and the settlement statement will be the document that both parties receive. What kind of statement are you giving the broker at closing? And that's right now, fortunately, we're getting a combo statement, which means both sides of the transaction, and we get that statement from the title from the title company at closing. There is still discussion going on as to whether we'll keep it that way or whether we're going to get our side only of the deal. For example, if I've got the listing side, am I only going to get the seller, the part of the settlement statement showing all the seller credits and debits, or are we going to get the combo? Obviously, the real estate department, the commissioner certainly wants us to have a combo statement so that she can track, so a department audit can track all disbursements that are coming out of escrow. So stay tuned on that one. Hopefully it doesn't change, but there may be some changes on that down the road. So we are definitely looking for a combo statement, both sides. We want buyer and seller disbursements that are tracking down.
Okay, so the next question is, who's filling out the seller closing documents and does it need to be signed?
So again, we go back to the fact that title has created a closing disclosure, and actually title is filling this out. And so again, wow, look at what happened here. We've got the closing disclosure form, it's a lender form, and now the title has developed, or the title industry has come up with a seller closing disclosure, and they're the ones that are filling it out. Does it need to be signed? The reason that I put that question in there is because title is now asking for lenders are now asking title for a signed seller copy of the closing disclosure in order for them to come up with their final. Again, that's kind of a head scratcher, and but it is happening. I was at a lunch last week for the title industry, and we were having various discussions of what have we discovered since we've been into TRID, and obviously I've had TRID closings now for the past couple of weeks, and what are some of the things that have come up? And again, I think lenders are still trying to develop their sea legs, if you will, and to understand the process, and they take the 1,800 and I think 80 some pages of regulation, and they decide to interpret some of the categories themselves. And it creates now different rules and different practices and requirements for different lenders. And obviously I don't think that was the intent. We should all be on the same page, and hopefully eventually we will be. But at this time, again, the seller closing disclosure is something that some lenders are requiring back from the title and for it to be signed. by the seller. The timing of that, when you think about that, is problematic as well, because when does the seller get in to sign the documents? And in effect, it's kind of a pre-audit or a pre-settlement statement. But stay tuned for that, and we'll see where it develops. Again, it's not an issue on all deals, but on some deals it is coming up that way.
Okay, any questions about that? Looks like we're going to be moving on to financing. Lots and lots of questions about financing. Deborah's first question is, what will I see as the buyer or seller's agent prior to closing to ensure the charges are correct?
Sure. Good question, and you're either going to see, ultimately what you're looking for the settlement statement. And the settlement statement is going to be the document that has both sides, assuming you get the combo statement. It's going to have both sides of the title company charges and scheduled disbursements, etc. If you're on the listing side, you're going to get, you could get a copy of the closing disclosure. Again, if title is requesting or requiring the seller to sign that document, they're certainly going to submit that to both the seller and the listing agent prior to requesting the seller to sign, just because of the listing agent's role in the transaction.
Excellent. I think that's probably one of our most often asked questions.
Sure, and again, since in the past when we're looking for the HUD-1 and were things set up properly, that's what we're looking for here as well. But instead of the HUD-1, we'll be getting the settlement statement. Mm-hmm. So far, I haven't heard of any agents or having issues with getting that from title, so that's a good thing.
That is a good thing. Okay, so this one comes up quite a bit as well. What are the rules regarding a listing agent telling a buyer which title company to use in the listing?
You talked about being in the business for 35 years. I think we've been talking about this for 35 years.
It feels like it.
Well, it is. Actually, the RESPA regulations that set this up were actually passed either in 72 or 74. Very few changes have happened regarding RESPA for all the way through the Dodd-Frank stuff. So the answer to this today is the same as it's been for years and years and years. The reason that part of this is coming up now, however, is because Armless has had a number of rules changes and has prohibited certain language in their in the listing or in publicizing the listings. I'm not sure what the rules are throughout the rest of the state, but speaking specifically to Armless, Armless currently is allowing listing agents to suggest or request certain title companies, but it is not allowed for them to demand or to, in this case, like the question says, tell or require a certain title company. That is language that's still being reviewed. 3 or 4 months from now, it might be different, but the rule today at Armless will allow a listing agent to put in the MLS remarks that ABC title company is requested or is preferred or something like that, but it's not going to have a requirement as to which title company is to be used in the listing. That is to be used for the transaction.
And I think, like you said, it's been coming up for so long that if somebody were to go to AAR online and check the legal hotline, it's probably covered while there.
Good answer. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Absolutely, yeah. Michelle has written about it a time or two. We discuss it almost every time the purchase contract is being reviewed, and in fact, that's the first time I got involved in it back, back in the '80s when we were doing contract revisions, and that language has been changed in the contract a number of times over the years.
Wonderful. Okay, next true and false question. All right, Deborah has another question. So, is it unethical for a listing agent to ask their seller to accept an offer using the selling agent's preferred title company versus a different title company?
Is it unethical? Is it unethical? I don't see where that's unethical. Part of the title company discussion is all a function of, in my opinion, supply and demand. So in the event that there's a short supply and the listing agent or the seller has requested title company A, I'm going to do, if I'm bringing the buyer, I'm going to do as many things that are requested by the listing agent as possible to bring my offer and to have my offer looked at in the best light possible. Now, when market is reversed and I'm looking at a property that's been on the market for 270 days and it's been reduced half a dozen times, and it says title company is requested or something like that, I could care less about that request because my buyer now should be being courted as opposed to being told or suggested which title company to use. So again, I think it's a function of supply and demand of the inventory as to how much a title company is pushed. But when it comes to ethics, hopefully there's a reason, and there's a seller reason or a client reason that has a benefit and not just an agent preference that we're seeing for that language to be in the listing.
Excellent. And Deborah, also, we always suggest that you talk to your broker as well. All right, true or false? TRID does not apply to hard money lenders. True or false? Oh, come on, true or false? No, it depends. All right. Jim, true or false? TRID does not apply to hard money lenders.
It depends.
All right.
Sorry. No, actually, it doesn't depend. And the reason I would even start with it depends is that it depends if you ask the hard money lender whether they are governed by TRID. The hard money lender is going to say no. The odd part about that answer is that there is no exemption for them. Okay. So until somebody complains and has the CFPB investigated, I guess they can operate as if it doesn't apply to them. But there's not a reason. There's not an exemption that's in existence that allows them to operate outside of the TRID lending rules. It's funny because I asked a question of an attorney for the title industry just last week, and he gave me this similar response. He said, "Geez, I haven't been asked that question in about 20 minutes." And so it's a question that a lot of that gets asked regularly. It's a question that you wonder why or how they're trying to operate outside the TRID rules, and yet they are. Title companies closing the deals because they're not the TRID police, and if a lender, hard money lender, says that they operate outside and people sign documents until the first consumer complains, I guess that they're going to do that for a while. It'll be interesting to see what kind of fines they've accumulated by the time the CFPB comes around and asks them for what exemptions apply to them.
So what's the difference between like a carryback and a hard money lender?
Sure. Well, carryback is AAR addressed the carryback scenario January of 2014 when that part of Dodd-Frank and basically the TRID rules or the CFPB regulations kicked into gear. A carryback by definition, we call it a seller carryback. You're dealing with an owner of the property, and so a seller can carry back his equity. A hard money lender doesn't own the property. And so a hard money lender is going to create a loan and on a property that they're not an owner of, and therefore that's a regulated TRID transaction, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you. All right, so the next question kind of falls right in line. And when hard money is used for cash offers, is it subject to TRID?
Okay, when hard money is used for cash offers, is it subject to TRID? Yes, hard money is always going to be, in my opinion, is always going to be subject to TRID. You know, the tricky part of the question is, of course, cash offers is in quotes. And so you got a couple of problems with that. Number one, I'm going to want a proof of funds. Oh, it's not a proof of funds, it's a hard money commitment. Okay, let's see the commitment. And then is the commitment good or not good? But to the extent that you have a commitment, then the question becomes, if you present your offer as cash, you need to disclose the fact that it's not cash, that there is a loan that's being taken out or that needs to be obtained in order to complete the transaction. So the buyer still has the obligation to disclose that it's not a cash offer, and therefore, you know, the seller has the right to find out what the details are, where the buyer is actually coming up with their cash. You know, I love some of the concepts, some of the rationalizations that you get about does it need to be disclosed or not, because, for example, when I get a loan and I'm ready to close, isn't that cash? I mean, it's processed as cash. Somebody has wired funds into the transaction, and so to use the argument that I'm getting a hard money loan, but I'm going to call this as cash is, you know, as silly as people saying, you know, I'm getting a regular loan, I'm going to treat this as cash. Either way, it needs to be disclosed, and either way, in my opinion, you're still going to have to deal with TRID sometime, somehow, somewhere, somehow.
Excellent. Okay, so this next question was sent in by almost a dozen different members.
Sure.
So it seems to be on everybody's minds. So lenders are saying that they will not give a loan estimate until a specific property is selected. How does a buyer shop for a loan if they cannot get the costs?
Sure, not a problem. Actually, the first part of the question is correct. Lenders cannot give an LE or a loan estimate form until a property is selected. An LE is part of the requirement after the borrower has completed a loan application. And a loan application has six parts of it in order to be treated or classified as a loan application, and one of them is a property address. Therefore, you're not going to get a LE until you've located a property. However, that doesn't mean that you can't get some ideas of what lenders are shopping, or what lenders are going to charge, excuse me. And so we get pre-quals, and in fact, I still hear of a number of companies that are giving pre-approvals. Or, you know, even loan approvals subject to this or subject to locating a property and subject to appraisal, et cetera. So you can still do some shopping. You're not going to get specifically quoted APRs, or the annual percentage rate, but you can understand what kind of fees lenders charge or are going to charge. The interest rate is going to be flexible because you're not going to be able to quote interest rates and APRs until a property has actually been located.
Excellent. So how does a buyer shop for a loan? What would they base that on?
Well, they can shop. So how do they shop? You can shop through the agent, and the agent can give you 2 or 3 recommendations. A lot of buyers, I'm sure, are shopping online, and they're looking for different quoted rates. So you can still take an LE form and kind of ask the question of what additional fees, what standard fees would the lender be charging. For example, if it's a VA deal, some lenders are going to waive their loan processing fees. Other lenders are going to charge $1,000 or $1,200, and they can actually quote that to you as a matter of business, not as a property specific. So yes, you're shopping, but you're not shopping with a quoted, locked-in final number, because those can't happen until after the property has been selected.
So instead of using the pre-qual form, like you mentioned, you're actually using like the LE form, right?
If you're going to use an LE form, you're not going to get it from the lender, because the lender isn't going to go. I haven't heard, and I don't believe that any lenders would go to that extent, because again, it's regulated and they can't do that. They can't give a completed LE form until they have a loan application.
Okay.
And a loan application means you have an address. If you don't have an address, you can't get an LE. So that's how it's set up at this time.
That's an excellent answer. Okay, so the next question came in quite a few times. So this is true or false? And we've had quite a few discussions on this question. So we'll have to delve into the answer. True or false? TRID applies to transactions with Canadian financing. True or false? TRID applies to transactions with Canadian financing. A lot of very honest answers. We've got about half true, half false, and quite a few I do not know. So I think, Jim?
All right, well, let's answer it. Well, first of all, let's understand the question before we answer it. So if the question means, if I buy a house in Canada and I get Canadian financing, does TRID apply? The answer to that question would be false. TRID is only going to apply here in the United States. If the question applies to if I sell a property here in the United States to a Canadian citizen and they get financing, will TRID apply? And the answer to that is going to be yes, TRID applies to all property, up to all financing that is involved in the United States. We also had a variation of the question to include if a Canadian, if I use a bank, for example, what was the name of the bank?
Royal Bank of Canada.
Royal Bank of Canada, to finance a transaction here in the United States, would TRID apply? Mm-hmm. It's interesting to note that the Royal Bank of Canada actually is a, I mean, they've got locations here in the United States, which means although that's their name, I don't think they only deal with Canadian people, and I think they're going to record their note deed of trust against the property located here in the United States. If that's the case, TRID's going to apply. So again, it's an interesting question. The first time I read it, does TRID apply to transactions with Canadian financing? I would say no. I'm sorry, TRID apply. Now I've confused myself as to what the question says.
Sorry.
With Canadian financing, here's the other one. Here's the other part that we have on there. So if I'm from Canada and I'm buying a house in the United States and I'm going to get a home equity loan on my property in Canada, mm-hmm. Okay, and pay cash then for the property here, does TRID apply? And the answer, in my opinion, is no, it doesn't apply, because you're getting financing in Canada on a Canadian property. But if we're talking about a citizen of Canada coming down here and buying a property in the United States and getting financing on it, TRID will apply to that transaction. Did I totally confuse everybody, or does that?
Well, the good thing is the webinar is being recorded. They can hit rewind and listen to it over and over and over again. But it does make absolute sense. Absolutely.
All right.
So
this does to me anyway, but again, it's kind of a 3 or 4 part question. Sorry.
And if you have more questions about doing business with Canadians and our neighbors to the north, we do have a webinar coming up in December where we're going to cover that exact topic. Okay, so question, Jim. In order to speed up the loan selection process, will lenders allow buyers to e-sign acceptance documents?
Yeah, excellent question. And they're actually, yes, they are doing that. And most lenders are doing that and trying to get that done. That's the good news. In fact, again, kind of a preview of some of the things that I heard in San Diego past few days at the NAR convention, is that most lenders are going this way. Initially, we thought some of the national lenders, or we heard that some of the national lenders would only be delivering documents to their borrowers via the U.S. mail,
Mm-hmm.
or via and not allow e-signatures. Fortunately, it appears that many national lenders, it makes sense for all lenders to deliver via and allow some sort of a e-sign to accept the documents. The lenders that we heard from were lenders like Quicken Loans, who indicated that they had closed thousands of TRID transactions in the first month. And then Wells Fargo, I was at a Wells Fargo booth asking what they were doing, and they're talking about they've set up portals to communicate with their buyers/borrowers, which will allow delivery of documents as well as signing of documents and the return of them in a timely manner. And again, Wells Fargo was one of those banks that the initial thoughts were that they were going to be mailing everything. So again, I thought that was very good news, and it does allow for timely processing of working through the loan process.
Excellent. Great segue into our next discussions, which is timelines. So we're bringing that up because everybody has questions. So the very first one, the question is, what is the time frame for doing TRID deals?
Are we looking to break down from point to point, or are we looking at the overall time frame for that? Let's
talk overall.
Overall. Okay, so again, when I was at the luncheon last week, we were talking about how long are TRID deals taking, and I've heard some lenders talk about having their average TRID deals coming in at 20 days. I've had lenders tell me that, so another one was at 26.5 days, and so these are local lenders, not national lenders. I wasn't able to get a average date from a national like a Wells or like a Quicken or somebody like that. But it is very encouraging to hear that people are able to get this done in a timely manner. In fact, I've even had examples of lenders that maybe might be lender number 2 on the transaction because the first lender was unable to get somebody qualified, that actually had to wait for the 7 days after the LE was issued in order to close a deal. And so it's like, oh my gosh, that's the absolute minimum. I mean, even when I'm doing TRID classes or contract check classes, I never spend any time on how many days, what's the minimum time period off the LE. I'm always kind of focused on the closing disclosure and that 3-day waiting period. And to be able to hear people that have to wait for the absolute bare minimum number of days is it's encouraging, which means it can be done. And obviously the buyer has to be motivated, but the buyer still has time to understand the process. So the time frame. The good news as far as the time frame goes is that we're not in that 45-day minimum. We're not in that 60 or 70-day thought process that people were putting out there as we were teaching classes, trying to get a handle on what it was going to take. Part of it I've heard is could be a function of the fact that again we're not in a heavy volume season, and when we get to February, March, it might be more difficult, but we're going to have that many more months of TRID transactions under our belt by the time we get there. So I'm encouraged as to what I've seen and heard so far.
So I'm wondering if our members who are have joined us today that have worked with some of the national banks, what their closings are. So if you could just maybe in the question box let us know if you've already gone through a TRID transaction with a national lender, what your time frame was. We can kind of, compare notes here. So while you're doing that, we're going to go on to the next one. And this seemed to come up quite a few times. It was kind of fun talking about the minimum number of days. Can a borrower sign and close on the same day? And are you doing simultaneous closings?
Can a borrower sign and close? The answer is yes. But can they do that and then sign and close on their next house? And the answer there is it's possible, although I haven't gotten a lot of confirmed examples of that happening. Again, I'll go back to my luncheon last week. I had about 20 title company reps in the room and asked the question of, are we seeing any simultaneous closings? And there was a gasping going, no. And I think part of it is that, I think the transaction now has picked up an extra step, if you will, than what we had pre-TRID. And that extra step is, after the borrower has signed the loan docs, they need to go back to the lender. And they go back to the lender to make sure that there were no other changes, that the numbers match up, that everything is as it was sent. And so it's an additional underwriting or compliance step that happens in most transactions. And so if that's the case, once it gets sent back there, it doesn't mean it's that somebody is waiting at their computer, waiting for these things to come back to see if there's any changes or not. So you got to get back into somebody's queue in order to have it reviewed and approved. And so it does create a potential slowdown as to getting that done. Additionally, as we get to the end of any month, of course, you've got all of the stuff that's going to back up. If you're going to sign and close on the same day and have simultaneous closings, you might be wanting to do that in the middle of the month as opposed to the last day or two of the month. And the other part of that, when we look at sign and close and simultaneous closings, is documents can be signed, 3 days early. Remember when we used to have that in the contract? Oh wait, we still do.
I wasn't going to say anything.
And so the fact that the borrower has signed it 3 days prior to closing allows a little more time and space for all that to happen. And I think would allow simultaneous closings if we actually get stuff signed 3 days prior. And now what we're waiting for is the verification of closing and the rest of the loan compliance issue steps.
No, very good. Okay, so we're going to move on, folks. If you have questions, go ahead and write them in the question box. And Jim is going to give us his NALR San Diego update.
Sure.
So for those of us who weren't able to make it over to enjoy the beautiful California convention, Jim's going to tell us everything that he learned in 10 minutes or less.
Well, thanks. On the TRID front, didn't have a lot of news. I did talk to a couple of people. First of all, CFPB had a booth over there, which I thought was very courageous of them. And also, I was glad. I came up with a contact and somebody that seemed interested to answer questions and address questions. And it was the same person that was here last week. Herod had a seminar and had a TRID representative speaking, a CFPB representative, sorry. And then she came from Phoenix to San Diego. And so as I went through a couple questions I had for her, she was already prepped. Go figure, they'd already asked her those questions from Thursday when she was here in Arizona. And the questions are things like what happens if there's more than one agent on a transaction, and how do you get it? Do they need to be on the CD? Because again, as Nick was telling us with MLS Connect, you have the CD, and the CD has the buyer agent or the listing agent contact information there and license information there. And some title companies are asking the question of, if I disperse commissions to more than one person, does more than one agent that need to be on the CD? And some lenders interpret that answer to be yes, but it's an interpretation that you can't point to a specific line in the 1,880 pages of the CFPB regulations. And so we did ask her that question, and she was she was going to check into that and get us an official reply to that. Let's see, what else were we asking her? I think that was the big question that we took away from that. Also, I had the opportunity to meet with NAR's legal counsel that's dealing with TRID. And when I say meet, of course, to me that means I was chasing him down the hall to ask him questions that he didn't address in his specific session, and did get that opportunity. So I look forward to talking to Finley Markson and in the future as far as some of those as questions come up. He once again reassured me that NAR has excellent relationship with the CFPB folks, and although their progress has measured in baby steps, we're still making more progress as an industry than the mortgage group is, which you figure since they're the ones being regulated, but no, we're the ones that are getting more clarification. So very happy with that, and very glad to get that, to have that contact. Let's see. Other NAR stuff, I mentioned Quicken, I mentioned Wells Fargo. So let's go back to the Alta lunch and some of the questions that were posed there. I asked the question of the folks, of the title people, if they've had any increase in discussion about optional owner's title policy. When we were teaching the class and we were showing the CD and the LE, and they listed the owner's title policy as optional and plugged it in as a buyer cost, there was great concern from title early on as to why you bring this up as an optional. Obviously, in our contract, in our state, it's a default owner obligation in the purchase contract, and none of them said they had any conversations about that. So I thought that was good news. Additionally, the one comment that did come up, and that I'm still trying to get a handle on, and maybe if people have had experience with it, they can share with you, has to do with the lock period. You can't do your CD or your LE until you have a lock. And the question becomes, once you're locking, are you going to do a 30-day lock or a 45-day lock? Because there's usually going to be a price difference. And so if you plug in a 45-day lock, all of a sudden you might have some competitive issues. Yeah. In other words, you might be a little bit higher than another guy. And now think about it, because now the impact is, are you going to guarantee that you can get the job done in 30 days and therefore get the borrower or the consumer the benefit of a lower rate, a lower APR? And if you don't, and now let's do the trickle-down theory here, or what happens down the road. If you give them a 30-day lock in order to get them a lower rate and you can't get the job done in 30 days, now you go to the and you get to the end of the 30-day period, and now you ask the seller for an extension. Is the seller going to give an extension, or has your earnest money run out? Or are you going to have some earnest money questions concerning that? So that was an interesting thing. Again, I hadn't thought about that, not being a lender. It wasn't something that had come up for me. So, again, if you're looking at lenders and they're giving your borrower a 45-day lock, you might want to, that might be something you want to shop, because they need to have confidence. Because if they get, okay, let's go back, I'm sorry. So if they give you a 30-day lock and they can't get it done in 30 days, now they're going to have to get a lock extension. There's costs involved in a lock extension, and because of the cost, you're going to need to do a new CD. And a new CD with increased costs creates delays. Okay, so that's why I'm going to need an extension from the seller. So, but if I don't want to incur that delay, and I start you off with a 45-day lock, my experience that 45-day period will be costing the borrower more money than the 30-day lock. So it's something to look at as we get there. Let's see. I guess the only other update that might be it's on the loan front came from the HUD assistant director was there and made the announcement about condos and about calculating the investment number of investors and allowing financing on additional projects, considering a second home not to be an investment property, and therefore allowing more FHA financing in condos. I know it's not a TRID deal, but it's something that NER has been working on with HUD for a long time, and so I think that was good news.
That's good. I think we have that link on our Facebook page. So if you go to facebook.com/AZRealtors, we have that link on the front of our page. Excellent. So it looks like you have answered just about everybody's questions today, because I am not seeing any questions. So we're just going to remind everyone that if you have questions about the MLS Connect, I've put Nick's information up on the screen for you. So business support services can be reached at support@aaronline.com or reached at 866-833-7357. Jim, any closing comments?
Well, I appreciate the folks that sent in the questions in advance just to kind of hear what the concerns were. Even if the question gets fixed or answered down the road, chances if you bumped into it, somebody else will have bumped into it as well. Again, we're looking for success stories as well as delay stories, because it allows us to share, how folks have overcome things. And additionally, I love to hear examples of this mortgage company's average TRID deal time period is this versus that. And again, when I, speaking and putting people on the panel, letting them know I'm going to ask you that question up front and hearing what their answers are, it's interesting how all of a sudden this becomes a point of differentiation. And you're looking at, what's your average time? What can you guarantee me? What are you going to lock for? And that whole process. And it almost becomes some of those questions that you need to be asking as you're shopping for lenders. Again, hopefully people are still getting their shopping, most of their shopping done up front, so that you're not going into that time period. Also, I had some questions today, as I got back, and agents are looking for me to answer different questions. And we're talking about when can I file a cure notice on somebody if they haven't given an intent to proceed. And it's like, okay, let's go back. What are we talking about? Are we talking about TRID deals? Are we talking about the purchase contract? And looking at the purchase contract, understand the purchase contract does call for an LSU to be given within the first 10 days or by the 10th day from contract acceptance. And so hopefully with the LSU, you can then track to see what the buyer has done early on, and then maybe figure out your intent to proceed. Because the intent to proceed isn't triggered by the contract acceptance date, it's triggered by the receipt of the loan estimate. And so until you're able to get that, you can't cure for having given an intent to proceed. So the only way you're going to get when did the buyer receive the loan estimate is from an LSU. Sorry for the acronyms, but hopefully people are following along with me. So that's one that, again, it's kind of a building blocks thing. You've got to get started. You've got to be at point A in order to get to point B in order to get to point C. So I think those are some of the questions that all of a sudden you get asked the first time, and in my case, I'll admit, I go to the contract and I read the contract, even though I was on the committee developing it. I want to make sure that I'm backing it up properly, and so sure enough, I go to let's see, I think it was 2G. Oh, look at that, it was 2G, and looked at it, and then backed up to 2F. And as well as 2E, the lines 68 to 77, in order to be able to track who does what when and when's it required, in order to find out about a curable event. And so again, it's, even though you're involved in the contract, even though you read it, when you're actually looking to interpret it, it's, in my opinion, best to have it in front of you and go from there. So again, I thank folks for being on this today. Thank you for your questions that you submitted, and you'll continue to allow us to provide valuable content by giving us questions for the next one.
Absolutely. And just a reminder that this is part 2 of a 3-part TRID series. And if you, since you're on today, I know that you registered, so you are automatically registered for part 3, which is coming up December 15th at 12. So you'll be getting an email from me and a confirmation. We have 3 other webinars for the rest of 2015. We have one coming up on November 19th. We're going to be talking E&O insurance, general liability, and cybersecurity. So we're going to talk about keeping your records safe online, and this is with Lisa Robinson. So this is going to be great. And then the webinar that I mentioned earlier, how to attract Canadian clients, is on December 7th at noon. And we'll be talking about, the differences, the similarities, the financing, and the cultures of what our Canadian clients are looking for. And then we're going to end the year with attorney Rick Mack talking about unlicensed activity and assistance. So you can visit our calendar at aaronline.com/calendar and register for those. And to answer your question one more time, today's webinar was recorded and will be available online. Just like part 1 is available on our website, you can see the link there at the top of the page. It's the very first one. Today's webinar will be available in about 3 to 5 days. And we'll have it up there, and I'll send you the link as well in a follow-up email. And we thank you so much for always choosing AAR for your education needs. We know you have a choice. I was reading Judy's statement that came out, and all those classes, I mean, thousands of classes in Arizona every month, and we so appreciate it when you choose AAR's classes. We have our 2016 calendar up, available online. The full calendar is available on the GRI website. So if you go to azgri.com, and you can see the 2016 education calendar. And these are all of our GRI classes, our REBAC classes, and these are statewide, so they're by association. So if you are a Scottsdale member or a Lake Havasu, Bullhead City, Sedona Valley, Yuma, this is where we are at right now. Please keep in mind that we are always adding classes, so this calendar is updated constantly. We have the brand new Certified Residential Property Manager program available. We'd like you to be aware of that. That's incredible. So for a complete list of upcoming courses, please visit our calendar. I know Kimberly has worked really hard. I think she's got, I don't know if it's like the first 6 months of 2016 or all of 2016 up there, but she has been working very diligently to include all of the upcoming classes. So aaronline.com/calendar. So Jim, thank you for being here today. Any closing remarks?
Nope, thank you. Again, keep those cards and letters and questions coming. And actually, we're going to reach out to the industry partners again with mortgage and title and do kind of a review session with them on February 4th.
You heard it here first, folks. Mark your calendar now. February 4th.
February 4th. I think that's a morning session. I'm not sure where it is, but we'll have more information coming, so if you want to save the date. Our full industry partners conference that we did in September, had our highest attendance ever, over 450 or something like that. So I anticipate a lot of good information will be coming out of that one that we do in February next year as well.
That'll be good information, up to date, because we'll have gone through TRID transactions by then with, our lenders and our national lenders as well, so that'll be great. So what are we going to talk about in the next TRID webinar?
Isn't it amazing that the CFPB and the lenders and the title and the real estate industry continue to give us updates, continue to give us new scenarios that we haven't discussed before, that we didn't think of before, that covers and that interprets some of the details and some of the things that weren't covered in detail within the 1,800 pages of the regulation. So although I can't predict it right now, you know, we had a number of things that have come up since in the last 30 days.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure we'll have a number of things come up in the next 30 days as well, including I'm looking forward to the response from the CFPB concerning multiple agents on the transaction.
That'll be a good one. That'll be a good one. And as always, if you have any questions, feel free just to hit reply to my emails. I'm Callie Waterhouse with the Arizona Association of Realtors. And thank you so much for joining us today, and we wish you the very best week possible.